2. There is a moment, maybe it already happened to you, when the air in a room changes for no reason at all. No door opened, no window moved, and yet something in your chest tightened, or softened, or simply knew. 2, you called it nothing, a draft. Tiredness, coincidence. But Scripture makes a claim so bold that most Christians walk past it their entire lives without trembling the way they should. 2, the letter to the Hebrews does not say angels might visit the unaware. It says plainly that some have entertained angels without knowing it. Not in some ancient desert, not only to shepherds and prophets. 2, the verse is written for every generation, including yours, which means somewhere in a kitchen at 2 a.m., in a hospital hallway, in the back seat of a car on a night that should have ended in tragedy. A heavenly visitor may have already stood in the same silence you are sitting in right now. And it went completely unnoticed. Tonight, I want to walk you through 5 signs. Signs the saints wrote about in trembling handwriting. Signs mystics described, not out of fear of the angel, but out of grief over how long they had ignored it. 2, 5 signs so quiet, so ordinary, that most people mistake them for nothing at all. Once you hear them, you will not be able to unhear them. You will start replaying nights you thought were forgettable. So before you scroll past this, ask yourself one question. What if it already happened to you and you missed it? Stay with me to the end. 2, because what I am about to tell you may change the way you understand every strange, unexplainable moment of your life. Before we continue, subscribe to Ripperger Insights and turn on notifications. 2, because these powerful messages are meant for those who seek truth and deeper understanding, the war you cannot see. Every home has a history it never speaks about. 2, not the history written in mortgage papers or moving boxes, not the history of paint colors and furniture rearranged a dozen times. 2, I mean, the other history, the one that unfolds in a dimension your eyes were never trained to see, in rooms that exist inside the same 4 walls you sleep in tonight. 2, the Catholic Church has never treated angels as poetry. She has never treated them as metaphor, as comforting fiction for children's bedtime prayers, as decoration for greeting cards and cemetery statues. 2, from the first pages of Genesis to the final vision of the book of Revelation, Scripture treats angels as what they actually are, real, personal, powerful beings. 2, created by God before the foundation of the visible world and sent deliberately, purposefully, into the lives of ordinary people. Psalm 91 does not say angels might help you. 2, it says God will command his angels concerning you, to guard you in all your ways. The letter to the Hebrews does not call angels distant or symbolic. It calls them ministering spirits, sent to serve those who will inherit salvation. Sent, present tense, active right now to you. And this is where the mystery deepens. 2, because if that is true, if the church has taught this without wavering for 2,000 years, then the modern world has a terrifying blind spot. We have built lives so loud, so fast, so saturated with screens and noise and distraction, that we may be walking directly past the most significant encounters of our lives without even breaking stride. Think about Genesis chapter 18. 2, Abraham is sitting at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. Nothing dramatic, nothing announced, when 3 strangers appear. He does not know, not at first, that he is looking at messengers of God. He simply offers them water, shade, and bread. It is only afterward, only in hindsight, that the veil lifts and Abraham realizes who had been sitting at his table. 2, this is the pattern Scripture keeps returning to again and again. The sacred concealed inside the ordinary. Jacob, fleeing his brother's rage, lays his head on a stone in the wilderness and dreams of a ladder reaching to heaven. Angels ascending and descending upon it, and wakes up saying words every one of us should be a little afraid to say honestly about our own homes. Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. 2, I did not know it. How many times in your own life could you say the same sentence? The prophet Elisha's servant wakes one morning to find an enemy army surrounding the city, and he panics until Elisha prays a single staggering prayer. Lord, open his eyes. Suddenly the servant sees what was there the entire time, a mountain full of horses and chariots of fire. An angelic army that had been present all along, invisible only because his eyes had not yet been opened to it. That is the question this entire message is built around. Pooh. Not whether angels are real. The church settled that question long ago with the full weight of Scripture and 2 millennia of consistent teaching. The real question, the one that should keep you up tonight, is this. How many times has God already opened a door for you, sent a messenger to your side, guarded you in a moment you never knew was dangerous, and you called it luck? You called it timing? 2, you called it nothing at all? Because here is what the saints understood that most people today have forgotten. Angelic visitation rarely looks like the paintings. It rarely announces itself with trumpets and wings and blinding light. Tobit's son Tobias walks for days beside the angel Raphael, sharing meals, sharing danger, sharing the road, and does not recognize him as anything other than a fellow traveler until the very end, when Raphael finally reveals himself and says the words that should echo in every believer's mind. I was sent to test you, sent deliberately to your side, to test, to guard, to guide, and very often to remain completely unnoticed until the moment God chooses to lift the veil. So tonight, I am not going to give you fantasy. I am not going to give you sensationalism dressed up as spirituality. I am going to walk you through 5 signs, 5 patterns drawn from Scripture, from the consistent witness of the saints, and from the sober teaching of the church on how the angelic world touches our own. Signs that tradition says tend to appear when a soul or a home has drawn unusually close to the unseen protection of heaven. Some of these signs are gentle, some are unsettling. All of them demand something from you that most people are unwilling to give. Attention. Not superstition, not obsession. Attention, the kind Abraham gave 3 strangers at his tent, the kind that turns an ordinary afternoon into the site of a divine encounter. 2, because here is the warning hidden inside the promise. If you are the kind of person who explains away every unusual grace, who reduces every unexplainable mercy to coincidence, 2, you may be doing exactly what most of Scripture's characters almost did, walking straight past a visitation from heaven and calling it nothing. This is not a fringe theory whispered at the edges of the faith. 2, it sits at the very center of it. The Catechism itself affirms, without hedging, that the existence of angels is a truth of faith, and that from infancy until death, human life is surrounded by their watchful care and intercession. That is not devotional flourish. That is doctrine. 2, which means the question tonight is not whether you believe in angels the way you might believe in a folk legend. Pooh. The question is whether you have been living as though a truth this enormous were actually true, or filing it away in the same drawer as childhood stories you outgrew. Let's make sure that does not happen to you tonight. Here is the first sign, and it is the one people misread more than any other, because when it happens, it feels less like an angel and more like a mystery about your own heart. Sign 1. The peace that should not be there. The first sign rarely feels supernatural at all. That is exactly why so many people miss it. 2. Tradition calls it an unexplainable peace, not the ordinary calm of a good day, not the relief of stress finally lifting, but something categorically different. A stillness that arrives in the middle of a storm that by every natural measure should be producing panic. St. Paul describes something like this in his letter to the Philippians. 2, he speaks of a peace that surpasses all understanding. Read that phrase slowly. Not peace that makes sense. Not peace that follows logically from your circumstances. 2, a peace that surpasses understanding, meaning it arrives despite your circumstances, sometimes precisely in the moment your circumstances are at their worst. Think about what that would actually feel like. 2. A diagnosis is read aloud in a sterile office, and instead of the room spinning, something settles over you. Quiet, solid, wordless. A car begins to skid on ice, and in the half-second before impact, instead of terror, there is a strange clarity, almost gentleness. A mother stands at a hospital bed at 3 in the morning, exhausted past the point of coherent thought, and instead of collapsing, she feels, impossibly, held. The saints wrote about this constantly, and they were far too careful theologically to confuse it with simple stoicism or a naturally calm temperament. Padre Pio, whose entire priestly life was marked by visible and invisible spiritual combat, spoke often of the sense of accompaniment he felt in his darkest hours. A peace he attributed not to his own strength, to which he openly doubted, but to the nearness of his guardian angel. A companion he treated with such matter-of-fact familiarity that he would ask it to carry messages, to watch over people who wrote to him for prayers, to stand guard over souls in danger. For Padre Pio, the guardian angel was not poetic language. It was a daily working relationship. He was not alone in this. Centuries earlier, 2. Saint Francis of Rome was said to live with such constant angelic companionship that witnesses in her canonization process described her going about ordinary household duties beside a presence only she could see, a presence that corrected her, comforted her, and, by her own account, made certain rooms of her house feel filled with a light no lamp produced. The Church did not canonize her because of that light. She was canonized for a lifetime of charity, obedience, and quiet holiness. The Angelic company was simply what tended to accompany a life lived that closely to God, not the goal of her sanctity, but its shadow. Here is why this matters so much, and why I want you to sit with it rather than rush past it. The Church has long taught that peace is one of the surest marks of a genuine work of God. St. Ignatius of Loyola built an entire system of discernment around this principle. When something genuinely comes from God, even if it is difficult, even if it costs you something, 2, it tends to leave behind a deep and settled peace. When something comes from the enemy of your soul, even if it is dressed in excitement, urgency, or pleasure, it tends to leave behind restlessness, agitation, a subtle unease that grows the longer you sit with it. This is why the first sign is also the first test. Peace that shows up during crisis and steadies you without numbing you, without encouraging recklessness, without pulling you away from prayer or from the people who love you. That is not a red flag. Tradition says that is often the fingerprint of a protector who is never visible to begin with. But, and this is where I need you to listen carefully, not every calm feeling is angelic. There is a counterfeit peace, a false stillness that can come from denial, from shock, from spiritual numbness, or worse, from something actively trying to lull you into ignoring real danger. Scripture itself warns that darkness can disguise itself as light. So how do you tell the difference? Genuine. Angelic peace tends to have 3 qualities the counterfeit rarely manages to fake convincingly, at least not for long. First, it draws you toward God, not away from Him. It deepens your desire to pray, not your desire to avoid uncomfortable truths. Second, it strengthens your clarity rather than clouding it. You can still think, still act, still make sound decisions. You are steadied, not sedated. Third, 2, and this is the one people overlook most, 2, it tends to arrive at precisely the moment you need it and not a moment before, which is exactly what you would expect if it were being sent by someone who sees your circumstances with perfect timing. Rather than manufactured by your own nervous system trying to cope, ask yourself honestly, has there been a night, a diagnosis, a phone call, a moment of genuine danger, 2, where you should have fallen apart, and instead, something held you together in a way you could never fully explain afterward? Something that did not numb the pain, but somehow made it bearable. Something you shrugged off at the time as, I don't know, I just felt okay, and never thought about again? That, tradition says, may have been the first sign. Quiet, undramatic, easy to dismiss, and devastatingly easy to miss. But it is only the first. Because if a protector was truly present in that moment of crisis, it very rarely stops at peace alone. It tends to leave other traces, quieter still, too, and in some ways even harder to explain away. And that brings us to the second sign and the third, two signs so closely connected that tradition often treats them as a single, ongoing conversation between heaven and the human heart, carried out mostly while we sleep, and mostly while we are wide awake and paying no attention at all. Signs 2 and 3. To whisper and the dream, the second sign, is harder to talk about because it does not arrive as a feeling. It arrives as a voice without sound, an interior prompting so brief, so wordless, that most people do not even register it as unusual until they look back and realize how precisely it protected them. St. Thomas Aquinas, writing with the same rigor he brought to every question of theology, taught that every human being is given a guardian angel from the moment of conception, not as a comforting religious ornament, but as a doctrinal reality, grounded in the words of Christ himself, who said of the little ones, and by extension of every soul, that their angels always behold the face of the Father in heaven. Always. Not occasionally, not when convenient, always beholding, always attentive. 2, always positioned between you and the dangers you cannot see coming. Aquinas taught that one of the guardian angel's primary functions is illumination, not visions, not voices booming from the clouds, but a quiet strengthening of the intellect and the will, a nudge so gentle it can be mistaken for your own thought. This is precisely why so many people miss it. It does not feel like being spoken to. 2, it feels like suddenly, inexplicably, changing your mind. You take a different road home for no clear reason, and later hear about an accident on the road you usually drive. You feel an unexplainable reluctance to get on a plane, a boat, a certain elevator, and you cannot say why, only that something in you resists quietly but insistently until you listen. 2, you are about to say something cruel, something that would have wounded someone you love permanently, and in the half-second before the words leave your mouth, something interrupts the impulse, and you stop. The second book of Kings tells the story of the prophet Elisha warning the king of Israel again and again about ambushes the enemy was planning in secret, information Elisha could not have known through ordinary means. When the enemy king demanded to know who among his own men was betraying him, 2, his servants gave an answer that should stop every one of us cold. No one had betrayed him. The prophet simply knew things spoken in the enemy's private chamber. 2, because heaven was listening in ways human beings cannot. Picture the modern equivalent, stripped of chariots and kings. A father driving home late feels a sudden, wordless urgency to check on his teenage son. No phone call, no reason, just a pull he cannot explain, and arrives to find the boy in the middle of a crisis, minutes from a decision he might never have reversed. 2, was that a father's instinct sharpened by love? Perhaps. Tradition would not rule that out, but tradition would also refuse to rule out the other possibility. That instinct itself can be the very channel a guardian angel uses, so seamlessly woven into the mind it is protecting that it never announces itself as anything other than yours. 2, that is the pattern behind sign number 2, information, protection, or redirection that arrives without a natural explanation, quiet enough to be mistaken for intuition, but consistent enough over the course of a life to reveal a hand behind the pattern. Which brings us to the third sign. The one scripture returns to more than almost any other channel of angelic contact, the dream. 2, modern people are taught, almost from childhood, to dismiss dreams as biological noise, the brain sorting laundry while you sleep, and most dreams are exactly that. But Scripture consistently refuses to let us stop there. Joseph, engaged to a young woman named Mary, is visited in a dream by an angel who tells him not to be afraid to take her as his wife, and later, in another dream, is warned to flee into Egypt before Herod's soldiers arrive. The Magi themselves, after finding the Christ child, are warned in a dream not to return to Herod and quietly take another road home. 2. Notice what these dreams have in common. They are not vague. They are not symbolic riddles requiring a fortune teller to interpret. They arrive with unusual clarity. They demand a specific action. 2. And this is critical. They are always confirmed, eventually, by events, by Scripture, by the guidance of someone spiritually responsible. This is precisely how the Church has always taught us to test such things. Not every vivid dream is a message from heaven. Most are simply dreams. But tradition consistently notes a particular kind of dream. Rare, unmistakably clear. 2. Carrying a peace or an urgency that lingers for days rather than dissolving within minutes of waking. As one of the ways angels have communicated across every era of salvation history. 2. Has there been a dream in your life you still remember, years later, with a clarity your other dreams never had? A dream that seemed to carry a message rather than simply images. A warning you almost ignored. Or a comfort that arrived on the exact night you needed it most, from someone you had lost, or about a decision you were agonizing over. Most people wake up from a dream like that, feel a chill, 2, and move on with their coffee. Tradition asks you to consider a far more unsettling possibility. That you did not simply dream. You were visited, and you called it nothing if this message is touching your heart. 2. Take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Ripperger Insights, and share this message with someone who needs to hear it. 2. Because what I am about to reveal next, the 4th and 5th signs, are the ones that unsettle people the most. Not because they are frightening in themselves, 2, but because of what they prove about how closely heaven has been watching you all along. Signs 4 and 5, the warmth and the timing the 4th, sign is the one people are most hesitant to admit out loud. 2, because it sounds at first almost too physical to be spiritual, and yet tradition has documented it with remarkable consistency across centuries and cultures that never communicated with one another. It is warmth or light, or, in its rarer form, a fragrance with no earthly source. The odor of sanctity described in the lives of numerous saints. A scent of flowers or incense appearing in a room with no candles, no flowers, no explanation at all. Before you dismiss this as folklore, consider how carefully the Church has always treated sensory claims like these. Not with credulous excitement, but with caution, bordering on suspicion. 2. Rome does not canonize a mystic because a room smelled pleasant. These accounts survive in the historical record precisely because they were scrutinized, cross-examined, and, in most cases, initially doubted by the very clergy who documented them. And still, they persisted, attached again and again to moments of genuine spiritual significance. A deathbed reconciliation. 2. An answered prayer for a wayward child. A conversion no one thought possible. Scripture itself grounds this pattern in something far older than any individual saint's testimony. 2. When Moses encounters God at the burning bush, the presence of the divine is marked by fire that burns without consuming. When Christ is transfigured before Peter, James, and John on the mountain, 2, his clothing becomes dazzling white, and the disciples are described as falling to the ground, overwhelmed by a light that had nothing to do with the sun. Light, warmth. 2, and a kind of holy weight in the atmosphere of a room are not fringe symbols in this tradition. They are among its oldest and most consistent markers of sacred presence. Padre Pio himself became famous for exactly this kind of sign, though not through light. For decades, people who had never met him in person reported smelling a distinct fragrance. Violets, roses, incense. No one could quite agree in moments connected to him. while praying for his intercession at the instant of an answered request, even at the moment of his death, reported by people scattered across continents who had no way of coordinating their stories. Rome did not build a cult around a smell, but the accounts were consistent enough, widespread enough, and sober enough in their sources that the church has never dismissed them outright either. What would this look like in an ordinary home, in an ordinary year, far from any burning bush or mountaintop? Not fire, not blinding light, something far quieter, a room that feels for a moment warmer than it should on a cold night with no heater running, a sudden, overwhelming sense of being surrounded, not watched with suspicion, but held, during a prayer said through tears at a bedside, a peace so tangible that grieving families, again and again across cultures and generations, describe the final moments of a loved one's life not as horror, but as something that felt impossibly sacred. 2. Tradition asks you to notice these moments rather than explain them away with the first available excuse. Not to chase them, not to manufacture them, simply to notice. Brings us to the 5th and final sign, the one that, once you see the pattern, you will likely never be able to unsee again in your own life. Providential timing. 2. The book of Tobit tells one of Scripture's most extraordinary stories of angelic accompaniment. The young Tobias, sent on a dangerous journey to recover a debt owed to his blind father, 2. is joined by a traveling companion, cheerful, capable, seemingly ordinary, willing to share the road, the risk, and the burden. Only at the very end of the story does this companion reveal himself as the archangel Raphael, sent by God to guard Tobias at every step, guiding him past danger on the riverbank. 2. Steering him toward a wife in mortal peril, protecting the entire family through a sequence of events too precisely coordinated to be coincidence. The Acts of the Apostles tells a similarly astonishing story. Peter, 2, imprisoned by Herod and scheduled for execution the next morning, is woken in his cell by an angel who strikes the chains from his wrists, walks him past 2 levels of guards who somehow neither see nor stop them, 2, and leads him through an iron gate that Scripture says opened for them by itself. Peter, remarkably, thinks he is dreaming the entire time. It is only once he is standing alone in the empty street, the angel gone, that he says the words every one of us should examine our own lives for the courage to say, "Now I know for certain that the Lord has sent his angel. Now I know for certain." How many times in your own life has something been arranged with a precision too exact to be luck? A phone call that came at the only moment you would have answered it. 2. A stranger who appeared with exactly the help you needed and then vanished from your life entirely, never to be seen again. A delay that infuriated you at the time, a missed flight, a canceled meeting, a red light you cursed under your breath, that later turned out to have kept you away from a disaster you never even knew you had escaped. Tobias thought he was traveling with a hired guide. 2. Peter thought he was dreaming. Abraham thought he was serving dinner to 3 strangers. What if you have already lived a version of their story and simply have not yet had your own moment in the empty street, saying, "Now I know for certain"? The danger of chasing signs now, I need to say something that will slow this message down, and I make no apology for that. 2, because what I am about to say may be more important than all 5 signs combined. The moment people become convinced that angels are real and active in their lives, a very predictable and very dangerous temptation follows close behind. The temptation to go looking for more, to chase the feeling, to manufacture the sign, to treat the sacred as something owed to us as demand. 2, rather than a gift given according to a wisdom far beyond our own. This is precisely where the Church's teaching on the discernment of spirits becomes not optional theological trivia, but urgent, practical protection. St. Paul warns the Corinthians directly that even the enemy of the soul can disguise himself as an angel of light, a warning so serious, so specific. 2, that it should stop every spiritually hungry heart before it goes chasing signs and wonders with no framework for testing what it finds. 2, the tragedy is that this warning is largely forgotten in a culture fascinated by the paranormal. 2, trading techniques online for opening yourself up to contact with the beyond as though the unseen world were a hobby rather than a battlefield. Here is the distinction tradition has always insisted on. 2, and it could not be more important. Authentic angelic activity draws a soul toward humility, toward the sacraments, toward Scripture, toward the ordinary and often unglamorous work of loving the people in front of you. Deceptive spiritual activity, regardless of how peaceful, exciting, or profound it initially feels, tends, over time, to draw a soul toward pride, toward secrecy, toward a hunger for more experiences rather than more virtue, and eventually toward practices the Church has always warned against: divination, seances, mediums, paratu, spirit boards, and any deliberate attempt to summon contact with the spiritual world outside of the Church's sacramental life. This is not superstition. 2, this is the accumulated wisdom of 2,000 years of souls who went looking for angels in the wrong places and found something else entirely waiting to answer. 2, so how do you seek angelic protection rightly? Not through spectacle, not through experimentation, but through the channels the Church has always taught are safe. 2, the answer tradition gives is almost disappointingly simple, and that simplicity is itself part of the lesson: prayer. Ordinary, daily, unglamorous prayer. 2, the Church places a specific prayer to the guardian angel on the lips of children for a reason. Not because it is childish, but because it establishes, early and often, a relationship of trust with a protector most adults have long since stopped acknowledging. Angel of God, my guardian dear, to whom God's love commits me here, ever this day be at my side, to light and guard, to rule and guide. 4 lines. No incense required, no candles, no rituals, no altered states of consciousness. Just a daily acknowledgement that you are not walking through your home, your street, your life entirely alone. Sacramentals matter here too. Holy water sprinkled through a home. Blessed objects kept with reverence rather than superstition. The rosary prayed not as a magic formula, but as sustained. Attentive conversation. These are not decorations. Tradition treats them as real instruments of grace, real points of contact between the visible world you can touch and the invisible world that has been protecting you since before you could speak. There is also Saint Michael, whom tradition places as guardian not merely of individuals but of the Church herself. 2, and whose prayer, composed in an age that took spiritual warfare with total seriousness, asks for defense in battle against the wickedness and snares of the devil, precisely because discernment is not a passive art. 2, it has to be prayed for deliberately, the same way a home is not protected simply by owning a lock, but by actually turning the key each night. A life open to angelic protection is not a passive life. 2, it is a vigilant one. And above every practice, every prayer, every sacramental, the sacraments themselves. Confession, the Eucharist. These, the Church has always taught, 2, are the primary and safest channels of grace available to any human being. Far more powerful and far more reliably protective than any pursuit of angelic phenomena for their own sake. An angel's entire purpose, after all, is to serve God's plan for your salvation, not to entertain your curiosity. A soul who receives the sacraments faithfully, who prays honestly, 2, who lives with humility rather than spiritual hunger for spectacle, places itself precisely where the angels are already working hardest, whether or not that soul ever consciously notices a single sign. 2, this is the paradox tradition keeps circling back to, and I want you to sit with it before we move to the final part of this message. People most likely to actually experience angelic protection are rarely the ones obsessively searching for it. They are the ones quietly living faithful lives, praying honestly, showing up for the people in front of them, and only looking back, much later, do they recognize how many times they were never alone at all. 2. So if you recognized even one of the 5 signs in your own life while listening to this, do not go chasing the next one. Do not treat this message as a formula or a checklist to fulfill. 2. Treat it the way Abraham treated 3 strangers at his tent, with quiet attention, with hospitality, with gratitude, and let heaven decide what happens next. 2. Because there is one more piece of this mystery left to reveal, and it has less to do with angels than it does with you. Open your eyes. Let's go back to where we started. A room where the air changes for no reason. A silence that suddenly feels occupied. A night you shrugged off years ago as nothing more than nerves, or tiredness, or an overactive imagination. 2. I told you at the beginning of this message that the letter to the Hebrews makes a claim most Christians walk past their entire lives without trembling the way they should. That some have entertained angels without knowing it. We have spent this entire message unpacking 5 signs tradition has handed down across centuries, an unexplainable peace in the middle of chaos, a wordless prompting that steered you from danger, a dream too clear and too specific to be ordinary, a warmth or light with no natural source, and a pattern of timing too precise to be coincidence. 2. But here is the final piece of the mystery, the one I have been building toward this entire time, and it is not a 6th sign. It is a question. 2. What if the reason so many people never recognize these signs has nothing to do with the signs themselves, and everything to do with the state of the eyes trying to see them? Remember Elisha's servant, terrified at the sight of an enemy army surrounding the city, blind to the far greater army of fire standing invisibly alongside them. The angelic army was not absent. It was not late. It was already there, already positioned, already protecting. The only thing missing was sight. And Elisha's prayer was not, Lord, send more angels. His prayer was, Lord, open his eyes. 2. That is the prayer this entire message has been leading you toward, because the truth beneath everything I have told you tonight is this. Heaven's protection may not be rare at all. It may be constant, patient. 2, and largely unnoticed. Not because God is stingy with his mercy, but because we have trained ourselves, generation after generation, screen after screen, distraction after distraction, to explain away exactly the kind of moments this message has described. We call the peace nothing. We call the warning intuition. We call the dream random. We call the timing luck. We call the warmth a draft. 2. And in doing so, we do precisely what Jacob did before his own eyes were opened in the wilderness. We lie down, we sleep, and only in looking back do we have the chance to say, with equal parts wonder and grief, surely the Lord was in this place, and I did not know it. I do not want that to be your story, not anymore. So here, at the end of this message, I am not going to ask you to go looking for spectacle. I am not going to ask you to sit in a dark room waiting for a feeling. I am going to ask you to do something far harder and far more transformative. Go back through your own life, honestly, prayerfully, and ask whether any of these 5 signs already happened to you, and you called it nothing, the accident you somehow avoided by seconds. The friend who called at the exact moment you needed a friend to call. 2. The dream about someone you loved the week before they died, so clear you still remember every word of it. The stillness that held you together at a funeral when everyone expected you to fall apart. 2. The stranger who appeared with exactly the help you needed and then disappeared from your life completely. Tradition does not ask you to prove these were angelic. It asks you to stop assuming automatically that they were not. Because here is the deepest thread running through every story we have walked through tonight. Abraham's strangers, Jacob's ladder, Tobias's companion, Elisha's fiery mountain, Peter's open prison gate. In every single case, the angel was present long before the person recognized it. The visitation did not begin at the moment of revelation. It began earlier, quietly, in the ordinary texture of an ordinary day, and only became visible in hindsight when the veil finally lifted. Which means the veil may be thinner in your own life, right now, tonight, than you have ever allowed yourself to consider. Think for a moment about how many nights you have already survived that you cannot fully account for. How many decisions turned out, in hindsight, to have been guided by something more precise than luck? How many people appeared in your life at exactly the right hour and then quietly disappeared once their purpose was finished? 2, none of this proves anything with the certainty of a courtroom. It was never meant to. Faith, by its nature, asks you to hold what you cannot fully prove and act on it anyway. The same way Abraham did. 2, the same way Tobias did. The same way every figure in tonight's message did, long before they had language for what had actually happened to them. 2, Scripture ends its final book with a vision of angels who never stop their work, who surround the throne and are sent out again and again into the world, ministering, guarding, interceding. 2, that work has not paused for 2,000 years. It has not paused for your lifetime. It has, in all likelihood, already touched yours, quietly, patiently, waiting for the moment you finally stop calling it nothing. So tonight, before you close this video, I want you to do one thing. Sit in the silence for just a moment longer than feels comfortable. Ask, honestly, whether you have already lived one of these 5 signs. And then pray the only prayer this entire message has really been building toward. The same words Elisha prayed on a frightened morning outside a besieged city. Lord, open my eyes. Subscribe to Ripperger Insights for more powerful spiritual insights, hidden revelations, and messages that inspire faith and reflection. Join this community and continue seeking the truth. And before you go, I want to hear from you. In the comments below, tell me, which of these 5 signs have you already lived through and never had the words for until tonight? Someone else watching this needs to read your story. 2, share this message with them. You may be the very sign they have been waiting for.